In the spring heat of 1200 BC, you watch from the shadow of a stone doorway as a young girl kneels in the courtyard of Karnak. 3 priests circle her like vultures, bronze razors catching the morning light. Each scrape of the blade sends another strand of black hair drifting to the polished stone below. She doesn't cry. She's been taught that tears are impurity, that silence is the first language of the gods, but her hands tremble against her thighs, and she knows, that something sacred is being stolen under the guise of something holy. Her name was Nefertari. She was 12 years old. And what happened to her inside the golden temples of Egypt reveals a darkness that no amount of sunlight could ever burn away. Before we go deeper into this story, I'm genuinely curious. Where in the world are you watching from? It amazes me that these voices, silent for 3,000 years, can reach you wherever you are today. Drop a comment and let me know. The temples of ancient Egypt were more than monuments to the gods. They were economic empires, political fortresses, and carefully orchestrated systems of control. From the fertile banks of the Nile to the desert cliffs of Thebes, these sacred complexes commanded more wealth than most pharaohs could dream of. They owned vast stretches of farmland, controlled grain storage, operated workshops, and employed thousands. The Temple of Amun at Karnak alone possessed over 80,000 workers, 421,000 head of cattle, and income from 65 towns and villages. But there was another resource these temples claimed, one that never appeared in official accounts, never tallied in hieroglyphic records: young girls, taken as debt payment, offered as religious tribute, captured as spoils of war. The priests called them Hemamet Necher, the servants of the god. Beautiful language for an ugly truth. These weren't priestesses in any meaningful sense. They were property, dressed in the language of divinity to make their bondage acceptable. Their bodies became the currency that kept the temple machine running, and their silence became its most sacred ritual. How did a system this cruel survive for centuries without rebellion, without record, without anyone looking away from the golden facade and asking what was happening in the shadows? The answer lies not in what the ancient Egyptians recorded, but in what they carefully, deliberately erased. Nefertari's father had been a farmer in a village 2 days south of Thebes. 3 years of poor flooding had left him desperate, unable to pay the temple's grain tax. When the temple scribes arrived at his door, they offered him a choice that wasn't really a choice at all: surrender his land and face destitution, or dedicate his youngest daughter to the service of Amun. They called it an honor. They said the gods smiled upon families who gave so generously. They promised she would live in splendor, surrounded by beauty, singing hymns in halls of gold. What they didn't mention was that she would never leave, that her childhood would end the moment she crossed the threshold, that the word dedication was simply a prettier name for ownership. The morning Nefertari arrived at Karnak, the temple loomed before her like a mountain of stone and secrets. The entrance pylons stretched toward the sky, carved with images of pharaohs smiting enemies, of gods receiving offerings. Everything about the architecture was designed to make humans feel small. She walked through the outer courtyard, past rows of ram-headed sphinxes, their stone eyes watching her passage with eternal indifference. Other girls walked beside her, some younger, some older. None of them spoke. They had already learned the first rule. Inside, the air changed. It became thick with incense, frankincense, myrrh, kaifi, smoke so heavy it clung to skin and hair. The light dimmed as they moved deeper into the complex, away from the public spaces where worshippers came to pray, toward the restricted inner sanctums where only the initiated could tread. A priestess named Tayat met them in a chamber lit by oil lamps. Her face was kind, but her eyes were distant, as if she had learned long ago to look without seeing. "You will be purified," Tayat said softly. "The gods cannot receive impurity." What followed was not purification, it was erasure. The girls were led to a stone pool filled with water from the sacred lake. They were told to remove their clothing, every piece, every reminder of the lives they'd left behind. Nefertari's hands shook as she obeyed. The water was cold despite the heat of the day. Hands, belonging to priests she couldn't see in the dim light, washed her, slowly, thoroughly, places no stranger should touch. When she flinched, a voice behind her whispered, "Be still. This is the will of Amun." Then came the razors. Every strand of hair on her body was shaved away. Her long black hair, which her mother had once braided with such care, fell in heaps around her feet. Her eyebrows, her lashes. Hair was identity, beauty, memory. Without it, when she looked into the polished bronze mirror they held before her, she saw a stranger, a blank slate, a vessel waiting to be filled with whatever the temple required. They gave her a new name, Nefert Nebet. Beautiful is the lady. Her birth name, the one her mother had whispered when she was born, was forbidden. To speak it was to cling to impurity, to the life before the gods claimed her. But the gods weren't claiming her. Men were. Across the Nile, in the smaller temple of Mut, another girl named Iseri was undergoing the same ritual. She had been taken from a Libyan village after drought forced her family to seek aid from Egyptian authorities. Her mother, starving and desperate, had been told that surrendering her daughter was the only way to ensure the girl would eat. "The goddess Mut is the mother of all," the priests had said. "She will care for your child better than you ever could." Iseri remembered her mother's last words. "You are blessed. You will live." She believed once. In the stone pool, as foreign hands washed away her childhood, she learned the cost of survival. Across Egypt's temples, Karnak, Luxor, Abydos, Dendera, the same ritual fed young bodies into the sacred machine. By calling bondage divine, resistance became blasphemy. Each day began before dawn, washing, praying, grinding grain, weaving, sweeping, lighting endless lamps. Silence was law, punishment swift, friendship forbidden. When Nefertari smiled at another girl, she was struck and forced to recite the Book of Purity. Its rules erased the self. No laughter, no tears, no hunger, no gaze, no memory, no refusal. Then came the festival of divine union, the priest's sacred cruelty. At 14, Nefertari was chosen. Tayat dressed her in white linen, gold, and sorrow. To all, she looked blessed. Inside, Nefertari felt like a corpse being prepared for burial. "Listen to me," Tayat whispered as she fastened the last bracelet. "You will survive this. You will find a place inside yourself they cannot touch. Go there tonight. Go there and wait until morning." The inner sanctuary was a world of shadows and incense. The statue of Amun towered in the darkness, its eyes inlaid with gold that seemed to watch everything and see nothing. The high priest entered wearing the mask of the god, a ram's head worked in gold and precious stones. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and resonant, practiced at mimicking authority. "The god has chosen you, Nefert Nebet. You will be his vessel. Through you, he will bless Egypt." There were no gods in that room, only men hiding behind masks. What happened in the inner sanctuary was never recorded in any official text. The temple archives mention only successful completion of sacred rites and offerings accepted by the divine. But Tayat, who had witnessed dozens of these ceremonies over 30 years, kept her own record. On scraps of papyrus she stole from the scribe's quarters, she wrote the truth in hieratic script and hid the pages beneath the stone floor of her sleeping chamber. "The god took nothing," she wrote. "Only men did, and they called it prayer." When Nefertari emerged from the sanctuary as dawn broke, she walked differently. Her eyes held a new emptiness. She didn't speak for 3 days. When she finally began working again, weaving at the loom, she moved like someone who had learned that her body was not her own, that it had never been her own, not since the moment her father spoke her name to the temple scribes. 6 months later, it became clear that the blessing of Amun had left her pregnant. Pregnant temple women were moved to a separate wing, hidden from public view. They were told this was for their protection, that they were too sacred now to be seen by common eyes. The truth was simpler. Their condition revealed the lie. If these girls were truly married to gods, why did their pregnancies look exactly like human ones? Nefertari gave birth on a summer night when the air was so still it felt like the world was holding its breath. The pain lasted hours. Tayat stayed with her, whispering encouragements, wiping her forehead with cool water. When the baby finally came, a daughter, small and perfect, Nefertari held her for only a moment before the child was taken to the temple nursery. She was allowed to visit her daughter during the first 3 years. Short visits, always supervised. She would sit with the child in a sunny courtyard, singing the songs her own mother had sung to her, running her fingers through the girl's soft black hair. Those were the only moments in those years when Nefertari felt human again. When her daughter turned 4, the priests came. "She is chosen," they said. Nefertari tried to beg, but words meant nothing. They took the child, and she only saw her again across courtyards. Shaved head, white robes, empty eyes. Love was forbidden. The cycle endured. Daughters raised in the temple, never free, never dreaming of freedom. Renutmet had served 23 years, once beautiful, now hardened by grief. She had seen girls arrive, break, and vanish. She had survived by silence until she couldn't. One evening, she stood and let her bowl fall. "These men are not gods," she said. "They steal our daughters and call it blessing. Faith is their chain." The high priest raised his hand. Renutmet did not resist. She had waited her whole life for this moment. The punishment for blasphemy was dedication to the desert. The condemned were taken beyond the temple walls, beyond the green strip of the Nile Valley, and left where the sand began its infinite march toward nothing. No water, no shelter, no tomb or burial rites, just sun and sand and silence. Tayat followed the procession at a distance, her old legs struggling to keep pace. She carried a small piece of papyrus and a reed pen hidden in her sleeve. When they left Renutmet at the border where green met gold, when the priests turned back chanting prayers of purification, Tayat remained. "Tell them," Renutmet whispered, her voice already dry from the desert air. "Tell them the gods don't speak to those who can't hear suffering. Tell them I was never impure. Tell them I was never afraid." Tayat wrote those words with trembling hands, pressing the reed so hard it tore the papyrus. Then she buried the fragment beneath a small cairn of stones and walked back to the temple, tears streaming down her face for the first time in 30 years. 3 days later, the temple women were marched into the desert to see what remained. Renutmet's body lay half covered in sand, her eyes still open to the sky, her hand still reaching toward Karnak as if even in death she was pointing at the truth. "This," the high priest said, "is the fate of the impure." But that night, in the darkness of her quarters, Tayat added another page to her hidden archive. She wrote Renutmet's name. She wrote her words. She wrote, "The first woman I ever saw choose death over silence." Resistance, when it came, was not revolution. It could not be. The temple's power was too absolute, too protected by sacred language and state authority. But resistance came nonetheless, in forms so small they were almost invisible. The women began to leave messages for each other in their weaving. A thread pulled loose here, a knot patterned there. To the priests it looked like imperfection, clumsiness. To those who knew the code it meant, "I remember who I was before." It meant, "You are not alone." It meant, "This is not holy." Others carved marks into hidden places, the underside of offering tables, the backs of pillars, the dark corners of storage rooms, simple phrases in hieratic script. Mutneret, daughter of Thebes, was here. We existed. The gods were silent, but I spoke. Iseri, the Libyan girl who had come to the temple of Mut, lived to be 57 years old. 2 nights before she died, she returned to a storage chamber she had been cleaning for 4 decades. With a sharp stone, she carved words into the wall where the darkness kept them safe. I came from beyond the first cataract. My mother, Behenu, sang of desert rain. I never forgot that song, or who I was before they took me. This life wasn't my choice. If you find this, know I remembered. Before death, Tayat gathered her secret writings, sealed them in linen, and buried them beneath the temple stones. If the gods are silent, she whispered, let the earth speak. 3,000 years later, archaeologists uncovered her bundle, papyrus telling forbidden stories of enslaved women and hidden cruelty. They called it the Testament of the Silent Ones, a memory stone refused to forget. No one mentions Nefertari. No one speaks Renutmet's name. But if you walk through those ruins in the early morning, when the tour buses haven't arrived and the light is still soft, you might notice small marks on the backs of certain pillars. Hieratic script, worn almost smooth by time, barely visible. Names, fragments of testimony. Evidence that someone, thousands of years ago, wanted desperately to be remembered. The story of the temple virgins of ancient Egypt is not unique. Across cultures and centuries, wherever power concentrates and faith becomes institutionalized, similar patterns emerge. The language changes, different gods, different rituals, but the mechanisms remain eerily consistent. Take vulnerable people. Isolate them. Tell them their suffering serves a higher purpose. Punish resistance. Maintain silence. Call it sacred. What haunts is not that this happened. What haunts is how long it lasted. How many girls walked through those gates? How many spoke Tayat's prayers without knowing her name? How many looked at their daughters and felt Nefertari's grief? We'll never know the number. The stone doesn't remember everything, only fragments. Only what survived the intentional erasure. But perhaps that's the final lesson of Karnak's golden walls, that absence itself is evidence, that silence is a story, that when the official records are too perfect, too clean, too free of suffering, you should look harder at what's missing, because empires don't build monuments to their victims, they build monuments to their glory, and they hope that beauty will be enough to make you look away from the bones beneath. Renutmet's cairn still exists somewhere in the desert beyond Karnak, covered by sand now, lost to the shifting landscape. But the words Tayat carved on papyrus survived, against probability, against time, against every force designed to erase them. The gods don't speak to those who can't hear suffering. That's the voice that echoes through the ruins now, if you know how to listen. Not the voice of pharaohs or high priests, not the official hymns carved in stone, but the whisper of resistance, the quiet insistence of women who refuse to let their existence disappear completely. The Temple of Karnak stands in sunlight, golden and magnificent, one of humanity's greatest architectural achievements, and deep in its shadows, carved in places you have to search to find, the names remain. Testimony that beauty and horror can share the same space, that monuments and graves are sometimes the same thing. The gods, as always, are silent, but their servants, the forgotten, the erased, the women whose suffering built the foundation of sacred power, they're still speaking. You just have to know where to look.